The rancher had lived in isolation for years, until a crying naked woman suddenly appeared at his fence. His small ranch stretched across the rocky hills of planet Aridia, a world where the wind rarely slept and the sun scorched the land during the long days. Most people had left the planet years ago, seeking cities with lights, warmth, and civilization. But Jace had chosen isolation. He liked it that way. He liked the sound of the wind, the smell of the earth, and the slow rhythm of life that only came when there were no crowds and no demands. Every morning, Jace would rise before the sun. He would step outside, feeling the coarse soil under his boots, and check on his animals. His herd wasn't ordinary. They were creatures engineered for survival in harsh conditions, thick-skinned, strong, and intelligent enough to recognize his voice. As he walked along the fence line, the animals would follow, their soft, low hums blending with the wind. Jace had everything under control. There were no unexpected visitors, no sudden crises, just him, the land, and the herd. It had been years since he had spoken to anyone other than a voice over a distant communication system, and he liked it. He thought he had everything he needed. But that morning, everything changed. It started as a sound unlike any he had ever heard before. At first he thought it was the wind twisting through the rocks, or one of the creatures moaning from hunger. But the sound grew louder, sharper, and filled with fear. It was a human cry, a desperate, helpless, almost animalistic cry. Jace's heart jumped. His first instinct was caution. Visitors were rare, and most of the time they were trouble. He reached for the old rifle that always hung by his side, its metal cold and familiar under his hand. But curiosity pushed him forward. He walked toward the source of the sound, each step careful on the uneven ground. And then he saw her. She was at the edge of his property, right by the fence. Naked, trembling, and covered in scratches, she looked almost unreal against the dry, rocky landscape. Her hair clung to her face, streaked with dirt and tears. She had wide eyes filled with fear, and her body was tense, ready to run or fight at any second. Jace froze. His mind raced. Who was she? How had she gotten here? There were no settlements nearby. No other humans for miles. And yet here she was, standing alone, staring at him with a mixture of terror and pleading. "Hey," he called cautiously, keeping his hands visible. "Are you okay?" The woman didn't answer. She shook her head, her body shivering even though the sun was hot overhead. Her eyes darted to the hills, as if expecting something to appear at any moment. Jace took a deep breath. He had faced wild animals, storms, and even sandstorms that could blind a man in minutes. But he had never faced a human in this state, someone completely alone, scared, and vulnerable. After a moment, she stumbled forward. He stepped back, giving her space. She moved with a strange grace, though clearly exhausted, as if she didn't entirely know how her own body worked anymore. Jace could see the scratches on her arms and legs, and he realized she must have been running for a long time. "Come on," he said softly, lowering the rifle. "I won't hurt you, just come here." It took several more minutes, but she finally obeyed. Her steps were hesitant, like she was walking through a dream. When she reached the fence, Jace held out a hand. She hesitated again, then grabbed it, her fingers trembling. He helped her over the fence, and she collapsed immediately on the ground, breathing heavily. Jace knelt beside her, examining her quickly. She had no visible broken bones, but she was weak, malnourished, and frightened. "You need water," Jace said. "Come on, I'll get you some." He lifted her gently and carried her to the small cabin at the center of the ranch. Inside, it smelled of earth, wood, and animals, a comforting scent, familiar and safe. He set her down on a cot he had made himself years ago, a simple thing with a blanket and pillow. "Drink," he said, handing her a small metal cup of water. She took it shakily, gulping like she hadn't drunk anything in days. Jace watched her closely, noting how her body seemed almost otherworldly, strong, yet fragile, human but not entirely like any human he had known. Finally she spoke, her voice a soft whisper almost lost in the air. I don't know where I am, what happened, Jace nodded slowly. It's okay, you're safe here, that's all that matters for now. For a long time she just drank, staring at the wall, shivering even in the warmth of the cabin. Jace gave her some of his clothes, loose pants and a shirt that would cover her, and waited. He didn't ask questions immediately. Sometimes when someone was scared or confused, questions only made things worse. As she rested, he began to examine her more carefully. Her eyes were clear, intelligent, and alert despite her exhaustion. Her skin, though scratched, healed quickly. He realized she had a strength that most humans didn't possess. Something about her was unusual, though he couldn't yet put his finger on it. Jace returned to his daily routines but kept one eye on her. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and made sure everything was in order, but part of his mind was always on the woman in the cabin. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from, and yet her presence had already changed everything. By evening she was sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset over the hills. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, and for a moment Jace saw a flash of wonder in her eyes. She hadn't smiled yet, but he could tell she recognized beauty, even after everything she had been through. "Do you remember anything?" he asked gently, standing near the door. She shook her head. "Nothing, just running, fear, and them." "Who's them?" Jace asked, his heart tightening. She didn't answer. She just looked out the window again as if the hills themselves might hold answers. Jace knew better than to push her. Answers would come in time. That night, as he lay in his bed, he thought about the quiet life he had chosen. He had liked living alone, but now, the sound of her crying earlier and the sight of her fragile yet unbroken presence haunted him. Something told him that this was not just a random accident. Her arrival was not by chance, and for the first time in years, Jace felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: responsibility. Not just for his animals, not just for his land, but for another human being. Someone who depended on him entirely, someone who could not survive alone in this harsh world. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know what dangers might come. But one thing was certain: the quiet life he had built, the life he thought he had chosen forever, had changed. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills, beyond the stars, something had set events in motion that would reach his small ranch on Iridia. And Jace Orlin, the man who had lived in isolation for so long, would have to face it. For now, though, all he could do was keep her safe. And as he drifted into sleep, the sound of the wind outside mingled with the quiet, almost imperceptible sound of her breathing. Two human lives on a lonely world, each tethered to the other in ways neither yet understood. Tomorrow, he would start asking questions. But tonight, they survived. The next morning, the desert sun rose slow and steady over the hills of Iridia, painting the ranch in shades of gold and red. Jace Orlin was already awake, walking the fence line with his rifle slung over his shoulder. His mind, however, was not on the fences or the animals. It was on the woman he had rescued. The cabin was quiet when he returned. The woman, wrapped in the oversized clothes he had given her, was sitting at the small table, staring at the cup of water he had placed before her. Her hands gripped it tightly, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Morning," Jace said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her eyes reflecting exhaustion and uncertainty. "Morning," she whispered. Her voice was strange, soft, and melodic, but it carried a note of fear, as though speaking might summon something she wanted to avoid. "I'm going to check the animals," Jace said, nodding toward the door. "Do you want to come?" She hesitated. Then, as if testing herself, she slowly stood and followed him. The sun was warm on her skin, and she squinted at the harsh light. Jace noticed the way her movements were careful, yet almost instinctively precise. She didn't stumble, didn't falter, despite the uneven rocks and sand. Out in the open, the ranch spread before her. Fences stretching across the hills, the engineered livestock grazing calmly, and the wind carrying the scent of dry earth and green feeds. It was quiet in a way that made her tense. "This place, it's safe?" she asked, her voice small. "For now," Jace said. "No one comes here." He didn't tell her the truth, that nothing on this planet could guarantee safety forever. They walked along the fence, checking for broken posts or loose wiring. The animals eyed the woman curiously, but they did not approach too closely. Jace explained each of them, how he fed them, and how he treated their injuries. "You take care of them very well," she said finally. Her voice had a strange accent, something he couldn't place, not entirely human. "I've had practice," Jace replied, shrugging. "You have to. Out here, mistakes can cost you," she nodded, glancing around. "Mistakes, yes." Her eyes drifted to the horizon as if seeing something invisible to him. "They were chasing me." Jace stopped, frowning. "Chasing you?" She didn't answer right away. She turned her head, studying him with piercing eyes. "I don't know who they are, but they won't stop until they find me." Jace's stomach tightened. He had faced storms, predators, and the harsh land itself, but this was something else. Something bigger than the ranch, bigger than any danger he had prepared for. Back inside the cabin, he gave her some simple food: dried meat, bread, and water. She ate slowly, almost mechanically, as if trying to remember what eating felt like. He watched her, thinking about how fragile she seemed, and yet how much life force she carried. Over the next few hours, she started exploring the cabin and the surrounding land. Jace allowed it, keeping a cautious eye on her. She touched the tools, the equipment, and even the small solar panels he had set up to power his life. Her fingers lingered over things in ways that suggested she understood more than she should. "Where are you from?" Jace asked carefully, breaking a long silence. She shook her head. "I don't know. I remember lights, cold metal, running, hiding, and fear." She paused, shivering. "They experiments, machines. I don't know who I am." Jace felt a pang of sympathy. He had lived alone for so long that he sometimes forgot the fragility of human life. Yet, seeing her like this, he realized that humanity could endure horrors and still survive. Somehow she had survived, even if she couldn't remember herself. He decided not to push her for answers. Instead, he helped her practice walking on the hills, showing her how to balance on the rocky terrain, how to read the winds, and how to notice signs of danger in the distance. She learned quickly. Her movements were precise, her reflexes sharp. He realized that whatever had happened to her, she had skills beyond ordinary humans. As the day passed, Jace noticed strange patterns on the horizon, small shapes moving silently, almost imperceptibly. At first he thought it was his imagination, or perhaps the heat rising from the rocks, but then he saw it again, a small, sleek craft gliding across the hills, stopping and turning as if searching. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing toward the horizon. She looked and froze. Her eyes widened in recognition and she stepped back. "Yes, they are here." Jace's heart pounded. "Who?" She didn't answer, only trembling. The wind carried a strange tension now, a warning that danger was near. Jace didn't waste time. He knew the ranch was defenseless against technology beyond his understanding, but he also knew the land, its hills, and the traps he could set. Humans could turn the simplest tools into weapons if they had to. "I'll keep you safe," he said, though he wasn't sure how. "But you have to trust me." She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. "I trust you, I think." They spent the afternoon reinforcing the cabin. Jace checked the solar panels, the fences, and the small storage of supplies. She helped, moving quickly, understanding without needing detailed instructions. He began to see something extraordinary in her. She was human, yet not entirely. Her strength, her instincts, and her intelligence were something else, something rare. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in deep orange and purple, Jace and the woman sat on the porch. The wind carried the scent of the dry earth and distant rocks. The animals grazed peacefully, oblivious to the danger approaching. "Do you remember anything else?" he asked gently. She shook her head, looking down at her hands. No, only pieces, faces, machines, lights, running, and fear. She swallowed hard. I don't even know my name. You can choose one, Jace said. For now. It doesn't matter where you came from, you're here and that's what matters. She looked at him, considering, and then said softly, Lyra, call me Lyra. Lyra, Jace repeated. The name felt right, simple, human. Lyra, you're safe here, I promise. Night fell slowly over the ranch. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying a chill that made the animals huddle together. Jace lit a small lamp inside the cabin and they sat in silence, listening to the world. But neither of them slept easily. Both could feel the tension in the air, a presence beyond the hills, waiting, watching. Jace didn't know what form it would take, but he had survived this harsh world by being careful, patient, and inventive. He had learned to use the land to his advantage, to outthink predators and storms alike. And now, he realized, he would have to use all of it to protect Lyra. Over the next few days, Lyra began to show signs of recovery. Her body healed quickly from scratches and minor injuries, and her strength returned. She moved with confidence across the hills, helping with the animals and learning to handle the small tools and machinery of the ranch. Jace found himself impressed and relieved. Somehow, she was adapting to the harshness of Aridia faster than he expected. But the horizon remained uneasy. Jace could see the faint glint of movement in the distance. He couldn't explain it yet, but instinct told him danger was coming. And Lyra's memories, or the lack of them, were a warning that this threat was not ordinary. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple and the stars began to shine, Lyra looked at him, eyes serious. They will come, she said quietly. They always come. Jace nodded. Then we'll be ready, together. For the first time since he had found her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope, not just for himself but for humanity. Lyra was human, yet extraordinary, and together they had a chance to survive whatever was coming. As the night deepened, they sat together, listening to the desert wind, and waited. The quiet ranch was no longer just a home, it was a battlefield in the making. And both of them knew that soon, their survival would depend not just on strength or skill, but on human ingenuity, courage, and trust. The days after Lyra's arrival passed in a strange rhythm. Jace continued his routines, checking fences, tending the animals, repairing small machines. But now his mind was never fully on the work. It lingered on the horizon, where faint shadows sometimes moved in ways that did not belong. Lyra had begun to adjust to life on the ranch. She walked with confidence over the rocky hills, helped Jace with feeding and repairing fences, and even learned to handle some of his simple tools. But she remained restless, her eyes constantly scanning the distance. Every night she whispered fragments of memories she could barely understand. Lights, machines, cold metal, people who had hurt her, and always the fear of being found. Jace tried to comfort her. You're safe here. Nothing can reach you on this land. She shook her head. It doesn't matter where we are. They always come. Jace didn't ask more. He had learned long ago that sometimes pushing for answers only made people afraid. Instead, he watched her closely, noticing small things. The way she noticed subtle changes in the wind, the way her reflexes reacted faster than he thought possible, and the way she learned the land almost instinctively. It was late afternoon when he first saw the real sign of danger. A faint glow appeared on the far horizon, almost hidden behind the jagged rocks. At first, Jace thought it was the reflection of the sun on some distant metal. But then the glow moved. It was deliberate, slow, and purposeful. Lyra, he called, pointing toward the horizon. She turned, her eyes narrowing. They are here, she said, her voice calm but urgent. We need to prepare. Jace's heart sank. They had survived storms, sand predators, and isolation. But whatever was coming was not a natural threat. It was intelligent, organized, and dangerous. He began checking the ranch's defenses. The fences alone would not stop them. He inspected the storage of supplies, making sure there was enough food and water if they had to hide for days. Then he moved to the tools and machinery, thinking fast. The land itself could be a weapon if used cleverly. The hills, the rocks, and the uneven terrain could slow down or trap intruders. Lyra watched silently, occasionally pointing out places that could be useful for defense. "There," she said, indicating a rocky ridge. "You can see everything from there. They can't sneak up." Jace nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. He had lived alone for so long that he had grown used to thinking only of himself. Now, another human depended on him entirely. Night came quickly. The temperature dropped, and the wind carried a sharp chill across the hills. Jace and Lyra sat inside the cabin, listening. Every sound made them tense. A branch snapping, a rock tumbling down the slope, even the soft cries of distant animals seemed amplified in the dark. Then they heard it, a low hum, unnatural, almost mechanical. It was coming closer. Jace grabbed his rifle, but he knew it might not be enough. Whatever approached them had technology far beyond anything he had seen. But humans had something else: creativity, adaptability, and courage. "They're scouting," Lyra said. "They want to see what's here before they come closer." Jace nodded. He remembered the way she had moved across the land earlier, her instincts sharp. "We'll use that," he said quietly. "We know the land, they don't." Together, they moved outside. The hills stretched before them, dark and jagged under the stars. Using small rocks and the uneven terrain, Jace set simple traps. He dug pits in hidden spots, laid wires across paths that might slow intruders, and set trip alarms using his old sensors. Lyra assisted silently, her hands steady and precise. Hours passed. They stayed hidden, observing the glow on the horizon as it moved closer. They could see nothing clearly, only the faint shimmer of the unknown machines or beings. But every movement told them something: patterns, timing, and strategy. Then came the first real test. A small drone-like craft appeared above the ridge near the fence. It hovered silently, scanning the area. Jace and Lyra froze, blending into the rocks and shadows. "They're scanning," Lyra whispered. "We have to make them leave." Jace nodded. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small metal flare, one of the few defensive tools he had. With a careful toss, he set it near a rock outcrop, just far enough from them to be safe but close enough to draw attention. The flare burst into bright light and the drone immediately reacted, moving toward the unexpected disturbance. "Good," Lyra said. "They follow patterns. We can use that." Over the next few hours, they executed a careful plan. Jace and Lyra used flares, noise traps, and shadows to manipulate the machines, forcing them into areas where the terrain was dangerous. Rocks tumbled down slopes, sand pits trapped small drones, and hidden sensors triggered alarms. The invaders were powerful, but they were not human. They could not anticipate the cunning, resourceful mind that understood the land completely. By midnight, the horizon was quiet again. Jace and Lyra emerged from their hiding spot, exhausted but alert. "They're testing us," Lyra said. "They want to see what we can do. They'll come closer." Jace sighed. "Then we'll be ready. They don't know us yet. They don't know what humans are capable of." For the first time since Lyra had arrived, Jace allowed himself a small smile. She was human, but more than human in some ways. She had instincts and strength that surprised him. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. The next day, they began improving the ranch further. Jace modified the fences, added false paths to confuse intruders, and reinforced the cabin with rocks and metal. Lyra helped, often pointing out clever ways to use the environment. "Here," she said, "they will trip if they try to come in that way. Here they can't see you until it's too late." As the sun set, they prepared for the night again. This time they were ready. The air seemed heavier, charged with tension. Both of them stayed alert, listening to every sound, feeling every vibration in the ground. And then they saw it, a larger craft moving silently across the hills. It was faster, more deliberate than the drones before. The wind carried the faint hum of its engines, and a small red light glowed at its base. "They've come," Lyra whispered. Jace nodded, gripping his rifle. He knew it might not be enough, but he also knew something important. Humans had survived impossible odds before. They had adapted, improvised, and overcome. And tonight on this lonely planet they would do it again. Using the traps and terrain, Jace and Lyra manipulated the approach of the craft. Small drones fell into pits. Rocks tumbled down slopes, triggering sensors. And when the craft tried to land near the cabin, Lyra's instincts guided Jace to the perfect hiding spots. They were invisible, untraceable, yet in control. Hours passed. The craft finally retreated, perhaps confused, perhaps testing further. Jace and Lyra emerged from the rocks, shaking but alive. They looked at each other, realizing something. They had faced a superior force and survived, not by technology but by human ingenuity and courage. For the first time, Lyra smiled, faintly but sincerely. "We can do this," she said. Jace nodded. "We will, together." That night they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars. The ranch, the animals, and even the rocky hills felt different now. They were no longer just a home, they were a fortress, a symbol of survival. And somewhere beyond the hills, something was coming, something that would test them further. But Jace knew one thing with certainty. Humans could survive, humans could adapt, and humans could fight back. And with Lyra by his side, he believed they could face anything the galaxy sent their way. The night wind blew across the desert, carrying the faint hum of distant machines. But inside the small cabin, two humans sat together, ready to defend their home, their lives, and each other. And that was a force no machine could underestimate. The days following the first encounter were tense. Jace and Lyra worked constantly, preparing the ranch for whatever would come next. The land, which had once been quiet and predictable, now seemed full of hidden threats. Every ridge, every hollow, and every rock became a part of their defensive plan. Jace had lived in isolation for years, but now he realized that survival was not just about the land. It was about thinking ahead, predicting, and adapting. Lyra's memory still returned in fragments. Sometimes she would shiver, staring at some invisible figure in the distance. Other times she would whisper fragments of words she could not fully place. Experiments machines never stop. Jace didn't ask questions. He had learned patience. What mattered now was preparation, not explanations. By mid-morning, they had set dozens of small traps around the property. Pits were concealed with rocks and sand, tripwires connected to jars of sharp stones, and small alarms made from old sensors would alert them to movement at night. Jace worked with efficiency, but Lyra's instincts were astonishing. She knew exactly where to place traps, how to read the land, and how to anticipate movement that he could barely perceive. "You're fast," Jace said, adjusting a sensor on a hill. "You see things I wouldn't even notice." Lyra's eyes were sharp. "I've had to survive before," she said simply. "You notice patterns, I notice weaknesses. Together," she paused, scanning the horizon. "Together we can fight back." Jace nodded. She was right. That was something the hunters, or whatever they were, did not understand. Machines could follow instructions, but humans could adapt, improvise, and cooperate in ways that no machine could predict. Late that afternoon, movement appeared on the far ridge. A larger craft than before hovered silently, casting a shadow across the hills. Its engines made a low hum that vibrated through the rocks, a sound that set every animal on edge. "They're coming," Lyra whispered. "Now," Jace's mind raced. The traps were in place, but this was not a game of chance. It was a battle of wits, of understanding and using the land to their advantage. He grabbed a few more tools, metal flares, rocks for rolling, and his old rifle. Lyra moved beside him, her eyes scanning for weaknesses. As the craft approached, small drones dropped from it, scanning for movement. Jace and Lyra stayed hidden in a rocky hollow, watching as the first drones tripped over a pit concealed with sand. The metal flare they had positioned earlier burst into light, confusing the drones and forcing them to hover near the traps. "Good," Lyra whispered. "They're learning, but too slowly. We control the ground." Jace grinned slightly. "That's humans for you. We don't just survive. We turn the world to our advantage." Hours passed as the drones explored the ranch, unaware of the traps and hazards hidden in plain sight. Rocks tumbled down slopes, triggering alarms. Small pits caught several drones, and one even fell into a narrow canyon, unable to escape. The aliens, or the machines they controlled, were clever, but they were not human. They could not anticipate ingenuity born from instinct, creativity, and courage. Finally, the larger craft attempted to land near the cabin. Its engines shifted, lowering it to the ground. Jace and Lyra held their breath, knowing that this was the real test. The drones landed first, moving toward the cabin in precise, deliberate patterns. "Now," Lyra whispered. Jace rolled a large rock down the slope. It hit a sensor, triggering a small chain reaction. Sparks flew, alarms rang, and the drones scattered, confused by the sudden chaos. Lyra sprang into action, pulling down makeshift barriers and directing the animals to the upper hills, where they were safe. The creatures, usually calm and obedient, seemed to understand the urgency, moving with surprising speed. The craft's engines roared, and the red light at its base glowed brighter. But Jace and Lyra were already in position. From the hills above, they used small rocks and tools to trigger additional traps. Wires snapped, jars tipped over, and drones began to fall into pits or spin uncontrollably. "They're stronger than before, but they're predictable," Lyra said. "Not clever, just programmed." Jace realized she was right. Machines could follow patterns, but humans could improvise. Every movement they made, every trap they set, was unpredictable to the invaders, and that was their greatest advantage. The alien craft finally lifted slightly, trying to retreat, but Jace and Lyra were relentless. They had learned its patterns. They predicted where it would hover, how it would deploy drones, and when it would attempt another approach. Using flares, rocks, and shadows, they forced the craft into areas where the land worked against it. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the sound of rocks tumbling, alarms ringing, and the faint hum of the machines. By midnight, the larger craft retreated, carrying the remaining drones with it. The night was quiet again, except for the wind and the low moans of the animals. Jace and Lyra emerged from their hiding spots, exhausted but triumphant. They had survived the first real attack, not by technology but by human ingenuity, courage, and cooperation. "You did well," Jace said, clapping Lyra on the shoulder. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You too," she replied, a faint smile on her face. "You think like me, you understand the land, we're stronger together." For the first time, Jace realized the truth in her words. Humans were not the fastest, the strongest, or the most advanced. But they had something no machine could replicate: adaptability, creativity, and the will to survive. That was what had allowed humanity to endure, no matter the odds. Over the next few days, they repaired the ranch, strengthened the traps, and prepared for the next encounter. Lyra shared more memories, fragments that revealed she had been part of a human experiment gone wrong, engineered to survive harsh conditions, tested for strength and intelligence, and hunted when she escaped. Jace listened, horrified but also impressed by her resilience. "She was human but extraordinary. You've survived worse than I can imagine," Jace said one evening as they watched the sun set over the hills. "And yet you're still here." "I had to survive," Lyra replied, "and now I have a reason to fight back." Jace nodded. That was all he needed. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about defiance, courage, and proving that humans could not be conquered so easily. As night fell, they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars. The horizon was calm for now, but both knew it was temporary. The aliens or the machines would return. They always did, but Jace and Lyra were ready. They had learned to anticipate, improvise, and control their environment. They had learned to turn the odds in their favor. And most importantly, they had learned to trust each other. "Whatever comes next," Lyra said quietly, "we face it together." Jace smiled. "Together," he agreed. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant rocks. The animals settled into the hills, sensing safety. The ranch, once a quiet home in isolation, had become a fortress of ingenuity and resilience. And somewhere beyond the hills, the invaders were planning their next move. But Jace and Lyra were no longer ordinary humans. They had survived, adapted, and turned the tide. And that was a force no machine could underestimate. For now, the stars were calm, but the battle was far from over. And in the darkness, two humans waited, ready to defend their home, their lives, and each other. Because as long as humans had ingenuity, courage, and determination, no threat could ever truly conquer them. The night was quiet at first, but Jace and Lyra knew better than to trust it. The desert wind carried a chill, rustling dry grasses and whispering through the jagged rocks. Stars shone brightly above, indifferent to the struggles of two humans fighting to protect their home. For days, they had prepared. The traps were in place, the animals secured in hidden valleys, and the cabin reinforced with rocks and metal. Every hill, every path, and every shadow had been considered. Jace had learned to think like an invader, and Lyra had sharpened instincts that made her almost inhuman. Together, they were a single, precise unit. "We need to be ready for anything," Jace said, crouching by the edge of the rocks, scanning the horizon. "They've learned a little from the last time. This time they'll come harder." "They underestimate humans," Lyra replied quietly. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the hills. "They think machines are smarter, but humans are unpredictable. That's why we survive." Jace nodded. That was the truth he had lived by all his life. Machines could calculate, follow patterns, and obey commands. Humans adapted, improvised, and when necessary, defied expectation. That unpredictability had kept them alive for thousands of years. Tonight, it would save them again. The first sign of movement appeared hours later. Small lights flickered on the horizon, moving deliberately across the hills. It was a fleet this time, a combination of drones and larger craft designed to overwhelm. Jace felt a surge of adrenaline. He had faced storms, predators, and mechanical scouts, but this was the real threat. "They're coming," Lyra whispered, her hands steady but her breath quick. "We need to act fast." Jace and Lyra split their positions. He climbed to the highest ridge, keeping the cabin in sight, while Lyra moved to a lower ridge with better angles for traps. Every rock, every ridge, every shadow was part of their plan. They had studied the land, memorized patterns, and now they would use it as their greatest weapon. The first drones approached, scanning for movement. Jace activated a series of tripwires that triggered noise and movement in multiple directions. Rocks tumbled down the slopes, drawing drones into pits and snares. Lyra guided animals across hidden paths, creating distractions and false targets. The drones reacted mechanically, moving as programmed, but they could not adapt. Not like humans could. "Good," Lyra muttered. "Keep them moving." Jace adjusted his rifle, though he knew it might do little against the machines. Instead, they relied on strategy, terrain advantage, traps, and deception. Flares went off in different areas, creating the illusion of human presence in places where there was none. Drones collided with one another, fell into pits, or became entangled in wires. The invaders were strong, but humans were clever. Then came the larger craft. Its engines hummed louder than ever, vibrating through the rocks. It descended toward the ranch with precision, sending drones ahead to scout. Jace and Lyra held their positions, waiting for the right moment. "They're faster than before," Lyra said, "but predictable. Watch their patterns, timing is everything." Hours passed in tense silence. Then a small misstep. A drone hovered too close to a tripwire, triggering a cascade of rocks and sand. It fell into a pit, followed by two others. The larger craft adjusted, but it was already being drawn into a trap. "Now!" Lyra shouted. Jace rolled a boulder down the slope, hitting a sensor and sending a flare into the air. The craft reacted immediately, sending drones to intercept the perceived threat. Lyra triggered a hidden net trap, capturing several drones at once. Rocks tumbled again, crushing smaller drones and forcing the remaining ones to retreat temporarily. The larger craft tried to hover higher, but the traps forced it into the rocky valley near the cabin. Jace and Lyra moved quickly, using shadows and the terrain to remain unseen. They could see the engines struggling to adjust to the uneven land. Every move they had made, every trap they had set, was working perfectly. "They don't know what humans are capable of," Jace said, grinning despite the tension. "They think they can control everything." "They can't control us," Lyra replied. "They never could." As the night wore on, the craft attempted a final landing. Jace and Lyra combined all their tricks: flares, rolling rocks, nets, tripwires, and even the animals strategically placed to create sound and movement. The machines, designed to overpower, were helpless against unpredictability. One by one, drones fell, engines stalled, and sensors were triggered at the wrong time. Finally, the craft lifted again, retreating in frustration. Jace and Lyra remained hidden, watching it disappear over the hills. Exhaustion hit them, but the exhilaration of victory filled the void left by fear. "We did it," Lyra whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes shone. "We really did it." Jace nodded, lowering his rifle. "They'll come again, but now they know humans are not easy to defeat, and that knowledge is dangerous for them." They spent the next day repairing the ranch and checking on the animals. Lyra helped Jace reinforce the traps and strengthen the cabin. They moved with a rhythm born of survival and trust, silently acknowledging the bond that had formed between them. Later that evening, as the sun set in brilliant orange and red, Lyra finally spoke about her past. Pieces of memory returned: faces, machines, labs, experiments designed to test human limits. She had escaped before she could be fully controlled, running through harsh lands and evading capture. "I survived," she said, her voice steady. "And now I can fight back. I know I can." Jace placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've always been strong. I just helped remind you of it." Together, they watched the horizon. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the battles fought below. But Jace knew that humanity had something that no machine, no invader could take away: courage, ingenuity, and the will to survive against all odds. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to a semblance of peace. The invaders had been driven away, at least temporarily. Jace and Lyra continued to prepare, reinforcing their home, training their instincts, and learning from one another. But they also allowed themselves moments of calm, moments of laughter, and moments of hope. For the first time in years, Jace felt truly alive. The isolation he had once cherished now seemed incomplete. Survival was no longer about himself. It was about protecting another human, working together, and proving that humanity could endure anything. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Lyra looked at the stars. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "Maybe," Jace said, "but we'll be ready. Humans always find a way." Lyra smiled, the first full smile he had seen on her. "Together," she said. "Together," Jace echoed. The wind blew gently across the hills, carrying the scent of dry earth and the distant stars. The ranch, once a place of isolation, had become a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and human strength. The animals grazed peacefully, the cabin stood firm, and two humans watched the horizon, ready for whatever came next. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the stars, threats still existed. But Jace and Lyra knew the truth. No matter how advanced, how powerful, or how relentless an enemy might be, humanity's courage, adaptability, and determination would always endure. And as they sat together, side by side, watching the stars, they realized something even more important than survival. The human spirit was unstoppable, unbreakable, and brilliant. In that quiet, resilient moment, on a lonely planet in the vast galaxy, humanity had won, not by technology, not by power, but by ingenuity, courage, and the will to endure. And the future, uncertain and vast, waited for them to continue proving it.